Charter Commission to order. Roll call of the Charter Commission members. I'd like to have each of you give your own name, starting with Dick Fisher around for the Charter Commission members. Dick?
Thank you. Dick Fisher. Hi, I'm Bill Sheffield. Jim Parsons.
Sherry Holmes.
Frank Reed.
Barry Broman.
Fred John.
First order of business of the Charter Commission meeting, incidentally, the other people up here, Vicki Almeter is our recording secretary, and Evie Wallers is our executive secretary sitting over there. She will pass around among you an attendance roll. We'd like to have your names and your addresses if possible.
Yeah.
First order of business, I'll ask the Charter Commissioners if they desire to approve the minutes of the regular meetings of February 27th, February 20th, March 6th, and March 8th. March 6th and 8th were brought up last meeting, but by the same token, the previous two meetings were not approved at that time officially. I'd like to have a expression from the Commission.
Chairman, I've read them, and they seem to be essentially correct except for spelling.
Great.
Sorry, the old school teacher.
Are you
I move for approval.
you're moving for approval? Second by Mr. Sheffield, moved by Mr. Parsons. All those in favor? Those opposed? From this point, we'll enter the public hearing so that we can gain an expression of opinion from you folks. And I'm appreciative. I have one written memorandum to the Charter Commission here. And I don't know whether there were enough copies for everybody, but we will see that everybody has a copy, Mr. Barnes. I would appreciate, I realize it's hot seat type operation, but I would appreciate anybody who has something to offer us to come to the seat so that the tape can pick up your comments, so that we'll have it and we'll be able to transcribe it for the benefit of those who are not here and for our own review. The hot seat is open for anybody who would like to make any comments or input. Ms. Barnes?
Yes, I'd like to read the statement which I gave you because there are only a limited number of copies.
And I would like to have you identify yourself as you sit down so that...
I'm Woody Maybach, Bill Buck. I live over here in that big park from here. This is my memorandum to the Charter Commission. 1. Single-member districts. The device by which the city of Anchorage has been controlled through the years is through all council members running at large. This has the following effect. A, because the expense is large for a candidate in an at-large election, the incumbents are re-elected. The at-large election tends to be a popularity contest, or more correctly, a name identification contest. New people cannot get a start in elected office. B, parts of the city never have had any direct representation. Through the years, most of the city councilmen have been residents of Turnagain, where there is higher income and more political awareness. I've heard it said in the past that there have been times when all councilmen live within 6 blocks of one another. And see, in an at-large council, there is no one who is specifically concerned with your problems. If you have snow machines running up and down in Russian Jack Springs Park, whom do you complain to? The police? There's probably off-duty policemen who are on the snow machines. Single-member districts will be attacked by Bob Atwood in the Anchorage Times. The cry of ward politics will be raised. This in itself is enough to make you know it's the right thing for Anchorage. Anything the Anchorage Times is for must be wrong. Multi-member districts should be avoided as being confusing to the electorate. I didn't vote in my district the last time around because we had 3 candidates and I didn't understand the methods of allocation. 2, limitations on terms of office. We should limit the terms of all elected officials to 2 terms of 3 years or some other limitation. This is long enough. If George Sullivan runs for mayor of the new governmental body and is elected, he will have been in office for around 16 years by the time he hangs it up. Limiting terms of office ensures that new people and new ideas will be brought forward. George Sullivan would almost reach the record of Sir Robert Menzies of Australia, who was in office for 23 years. 3, the city manager. If you contrast the way the city operates as compared to the borough, you can only conclude that the city manager does a better job. We should have a city manager appointed and serving at the pleasure of the council. If we have a city manager, we should perhaps have a mayor appointed by the city council from one of their members. He should continue as mayor only at the pleasure of the council. Under the present situation in the borough, we have an administration which is incapable of governing and an assembly which has no powers to rectify it. We should look to the parliamentary form of government in some of those aspects to help us get an effective new combined government. I'd like to just briefly expand on the remarks relating to the parliamentary system of government. I lived for 5.5 years in Australia, which of course had a parliamentary form of government. And during that period of time, Harold Holt was drowned in an unfortunate accident which occurred in Portsea, and the Liberal Party, which by a turnaround in names is the same as the Conservative Party, got appointed or elected as Prime Minister John Gorton, who was an obscure member from one of the North Victoria districts. And apparently the Liberals felt that Gorton, who was a former fighter pilot with a caved-in nose, would be an attractive figure on television to combat the Labour Party's Whitlam, who was the president, now Prime Minister of Australia. Well, it turned out that Gorton was a real misfortune so far as the Prime Minister is concerned. He didn't pay attention to business. He made a lot of inappropriate remarks, and it was apparent after a short period of time, about a year, that John Gorton was not going to be a satisfactory Prime Minister of Australia, just as we have found in the case of Mr. Nixon in Washington. But under the parliamentary system of government, it was very easy to remove John Gorton because you simply had a parliamentary division. And John Gorton disappeared as Prime Minister to be replaced by the then Federal Treasurer. And Gorton wasn't disgraced, he wasn't impeached, nothing happened to him, and I believe that he's still in office as a member of Parliament from the same district in Victoria that he had. Now, we have this idea which comes down from the original American Constitution that you have an elected executive over here and you have an elected legislative body over here. And this works fairly well when you have some cooperation between them. But when you get in the situation as you've had in the national government for 2 terms, where the legislators are trying to do something that is not agreed to by the executive, you have great problems. And I understand that part of your problems out there in the borough right now is that the administration is simply at variance with the borough assembly, and there's no way that you can get at this problem to correct it. And I would suggest that maybe the proper form of government should be something like an appointed city manager who would be responsible to the borough assembly and serve only at his pleasure, and then have a mayor who would perhaps be elected from the city council or the council, whatever you want to call it itself. and he would have a ceremonial job. I don't think that the situations you have in the city at the present time, although it's not as unworkable as the borough, I don't think it's a good idea to have a full-time mayor and a city manager at the same time. I think that it's working all right because the present city manager is a very diplomatic and intelligent man, but I think that it could develop into real problems. That's all I have to say. If anybody has anything they'd like to ask me.
Mr. Parsons?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Barnes, you mentioned the manager and the mayor kind of thing. I'm concerned that there'll be someone who is in charge of a program rather than a 9 or 15 member body. And I see a manager as a manager. And that a mayor is the one who presumably may have some program to put forth. Would you care to comment on those kind of differences, or if there are any in your mind?
Well, you know, Jim, to a very large extent, it depends upon the people that you have working these things. You can have what looks like an unworkable type of thing if you have the right sort of person. I would think that the city manager could do the planning and have the programming if you gave him the power and the authority to do it. There's no magic in forms, as you know. We could have right now, with the right kind of people, we could have a workable situation in the borough if you had a different type of administrator out there. So I think, you know, that it's going to be up to how it operates in practice, but you want to have as few conflicts as you can.
Mr. Sheffield?
Well, it's been long said, Mr. Barnes, that a city manager, to keep his job very long, should administer and do what, carry out the policy that the council sets forth. And many city managers you found over the years have been fired from jobs and have been on the television too much and trying to set policy themselves. If you look back in the history of Anchorage, so that pops up in my mind that
Would this be typical?
you need a very strong city council, or you want to call the assembly or council. You need someone as a leader. That's the reason I think they went to a
Full-time mayor?
full-time mayor aspect.
Well, it seems to be working fairly well in Anchorage now, you know.
And I grant you, it might be working because the two are amiable. What would happen in other cases.
Right.
Mr. Shy?
Bonds, would you elaborate on the multi-district representation? I didn't quite understand if you were for it or against it.
I was against it because the last time we voted, we had a situation where we had 3 candidates in my district, but they were supposed to be from different parts of the district, and I never really did understand what they were doing. And I think that multi-member districts are just a bad compromise. If you want to have some at-large representation, if at the end of the whole thing you feel that it's desirable to placate the local warlord down there at the Anchorage Times by throwing him something, why then, you know, maybe have, say, 7 members or 4 members elected from individual member districts, maybe have 3 elected at large, if this is what you want. But don't go to the type of situation where you have District A with 3 candidates running in District A, as you have in the state legislative system. You know, like District 8 that encompasses Eagle River, Muldoon, and Mountain View. All it's going to amount to in that district over the years is that Eagle River is more active than the other parts of it, and Eagle River is going to elect all the representatives and senators from that district. And going back to the issue of the single-member districts, when I lived in Minneapolis, which had single-member districts, if you didn't get your garbage picked up or you had trouble with dogs running around, you called up the alderman and said, hey, what about it? And he said, yeah, you know, we're going to do something about it. But, you know, who are you going to call up? You're going to call up Benny Leonard and he's going to come out and chase the snow machines? You know, not bloody likely.
Mr. Josephson?
That raises a question about the nature of the campaign for council, because I think that is part of the issue here as to the kind of district that should be. In other words, when you go to a single-member district, it may be that the question is whether the incumbent is responsive to garbage collection problems, dog control, and so forth, which I agree is a perfectly legitimate kind of issue. But lost in that, and I'd like to comment on this, lost in that may be broader discussions as to the long-range future of the community. Do you want to comment on that?
And there hasn't been any indication from the looks of the Anchorage Council that that's a matter of concern to move through the years. You know, the argument always is that you're going to elect them at large, and therefore you get a superior body of men because they're elected at large rather than individual districts. We'll go down and take a look at the city council if you believe that that's so.
I haven't done that since I quit.
Okay, good.
But I'm thinking, Bill, about trying to get a dialogue going about really significant issues rather than, just deciding which can be better, which candidate can better service a particular kind of complaint. And I think that he or she should be able to service the complaints. But I'm wondering how we can stimulate the district system, these other kinds of...
Yeah, what you're fearful is that you'll have just a group of parochial aldermen that are concerned with mom's view and those things. Yeah, sure, there's no question that you run that risk. You need some at-large members. Maybe to get an overall amount of planning done, or to get somebody thinking about the bigger problems. Do you think that you might consider some sort of an appointed advisory body? You know, Japan, so I've been told, is governed by senior statesmen, largely, who have no official position in the government, but serve an advisory capacity to the government. Do you think that elected representatives, I'm just putting question marks, are going to ever get elected and think about big, broad issues rather than getting the garbage picked up? I don't know. Maybe that should be done by somebody else. See, one of the disadvantages of the presidential system or the strong executive system, where somebody gets canned like Nixon, is that Nixon goes down there and becomes lost in gloom in San Clemente, and he, whatever his failings, he's got a world of experience and perhaps should be back in government in some fashion. You may agree or not agree with that, but it seems a shame just to throw him into the ash can. Suppose that you had some type of council of 6 or 7 people who would advise the mayor and would be appointed to get at some of these things. I don't think that electing them at large is going to get what you want any more than the other way around.
Mr. Parker?
Bill, I have a couple questions. Do you have any ideas on the name that you might come up with?
The Chamber of Deputies, you mean? What, you mean for the council?
Frank, should you maybe the same creature, it was just something that was voted down, like city of Lowell, and I was just wondering.
I think that's important, but I don't know.
It was just something that...
You don't want to call it the Greater Anchorage Area Borough, that's for sure. You're lost at that point.
You're also lost if you call it the city of Anchorage, aren't you?
Then what are you going to call it? What are you
Why
going
don't you just call it Anchorage instead of anything?
That's right, sure, why not? Or rose by any other name.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Fisher?
I'm having a difficult time hearing, I think the public might be too. Could we get a handle on how long this is going to be going on next door? And if it's too long, maybe we can move the cafeteria.
It's the cafeteria much further away.
She's checking it
The
out.
cafeteria was right across the hall, isn't it?
Evie's
I think
going
so.
to check it.
No, it's
Evie's
on
going to
the
check it
other,
out.
it's on the other hall.
One question, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering what your opinion was on service areas.
Can you speak up?
On service areas, what is feelings wrong?
The service area concept was, of course, in my opinion, the original cause of a lot of the split between the caused the friction initially. As I understand, the old Spenard Utility District existed for a long time, and that back 10 or 15 years ago, it used to be the boast of John Asplin and Noreen about what low taxes they had out there. Now, you know, it's every man for himself in Spenard, which you can see the subsequent effects of it if you drive around in Spenard. And I think that the concept of service districts is confusing to the public, and I would be opposed to it. I might just parenthetically add that I lived in Australia for 5.5 years in the great city of Melbourne. And if I may just take a moment, I'll tell you how Melbourne was governed, and I'm not saying that this is the way that you want to do it. Melbourne...
How big is Melbourne?
2.5 million. But it's a parliamentary form of government. Well, the first thing that you recognize is there's 45 separate municipalities which make up Melbourne. I could enumerate some of them: South Melbourne, East Melbourne. Each has a city hall and has a city council and there's a town clerk. You think, geez, that's a lot of government. Then you look behind the realities of the situation. The police are run by the Victorian state government. They're appointed by the Premier. The school system is run by the Victorian Minister of Education. The roads and the sewers are run by the roads and it's called a board that governs the waterworks and the roads and the sewers are constructed by them. The gas is distributed by the Gas and Fuel Corporation of Victoria. The electricity is distributed by the State Electrical Commission. So you get down to the whole thing, and what do the fellows out there in South Melbourne do, or the rest of them? Well, it's kind of an honorary position that they meet in, and they get the garbage picked up and see that the lawns are kept up. That's about the sole function of those multiple governments. And on the whole, they do a good job of governing, but it's so far as having meetings such as this and having citizen input. Sir Henry Boley, who was the iron-fisted premier of Victoria for 19 years, when I was there, would have dropped dead from a heart attack if you ever suggested he listened to the citizens. You know, because in the parliamentary system of government, he is a benevolent dictator until he's overthrown. I think that forms of government such as the service districts and things like that, which are set up to placate certain groups that don't want to pay taxes for certain services, I think become divisive and confusing to the voter.
Mr. Dick, I've got a couple of really statements to make, Mr. Barnes, and then ask you a question if I may.
Sure.
First thing, the example you pointed out, the Prime Minister being the administrative officer, he was an elected official, and whereas a manager would not be. So it seems to me that argument, would you believe that's a good system, goes to a mayor form, really. That'd be my observation, but I don't know. As to the districts, or as to the form of administrator, you know, we have a problem because when the Greater Anchorage Area Borough was formed, there was a question on the ballot whether we wanted a manager or an elected executive, and the area voted pretty substantially in favor of the elected executive. At that time, the chairman called the chairman. The name was later changed, but just prior to the name being changed, there was the issue on the ballot again, and the issue was on the ballot, and the outcome was again that the people of this area wanted an elected executive. We had a poll, a public opinion poll, same time as the charter commission was on the ballot just last February, and again the people said overwhelmingly they wanted an elected executive. Now we've got a problem as far as going against that sort of.
That I agree with that.
Right. Let me ask you one question. I think the Australian system may be similar to the English, where the person is elected within a district, from a district.
That's right.
But he need not live in that district. Is that correct? How does that system work?
Well, you know, whether you say it works well or ill, it's a practical system of government. And of course, in the parliamentary system, this enables the party organization to be stronger, because what they do is they take their most talented men and have them run from so-called safe districts. For example, Churchill ran from the same safe district for years, and he isn't exposed to the hazards of running in a marginal district someplace and getting overthrown. I don't think that it's necessary that somebody should have to live within the district to run for office in it. This, of course, has been an inherent American idea ever since the Republic was formed, that if you didn't live in the place, well, you shouldn't run for it. But I don't see that this has any practical matter. I can't tell you that the Australian system works better or than the other. I think it works equally as well.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Mr. Chairman.
Mary Coney?
Mr. Barnes, the idea of running from a district that they use from safe districts does promote staying in office a long time.
That's right.
And you were proposing that we have a maximum number of times that
Yeah.
a legislator, a local legislator could serve. I tend to agree with you. And I tend to agree that 2 terms probably should be it. If you can't accomplish something in 2 terms, perhaps it's time for somebody else to try it, because there is an innate advantage from name recognition from a person that's in office that may not approve because of whether that person is doing a good job or not. But with your parliamentary system, where they can serve from live in another area but represent a district, you still say that you want them only to be able to run for 2 terms.
Yes.
Would you allow them to run again after there had been an intermission that they did not run?
I haven't really thought about that, Mary. I would be prepared to comment. I would think that probably they should after they'd had it.
Had the rest.
Yeah.
I tend to think that would be a good idea too, but it would take the innate advantage off a little bit at least to make them have a rest in between.
Yeah, if you notice that in observing the political scene around here, that there seems to be a time when name recognition operates satisfactorily, and then if the person disappears from, or withdraws from the political scene, take for example Mr. Gruhl, the man that ran against Gravel for senator. Gruhl at one point had a substantial following, went out of politics for a while, and once coming back in, you apparently have great difficulty in recovering that name recognition which you once had. Well, we have an example, of course, Mr. Hickel, who had problems in the Republican situation.
That wasn't name recognition.
No.
Are there other questions? Yes.
You're not speaking in your remarks about the Australian system to the tradition of nonpartisanship in local elections.
No. All that I'm trying to say is that the American system of the executive, where you have a strong elected executive separate from a legislative body, can lead to the great troubles that we've seen on the national scene. Going back historically, Woodrow Wilson believed that we should have changed to a parliamentary system of government. And then in the recent Watergate problems, why this was once again brought up, and somebody with, in terms of shock, said, why, that's nothing but the parliamentary system. Well, of course, the parliamentary system has some logical advantages. Somebody's going to be master in the House of Government, and if they're amiable and can work together, fine. But you inherently have a built-in system for conflict where you have a strong mayor who's elected separately and from the legislative body we call the city council or assembly. And I think that you should think about measures to bridge this gap. Maybe you could institute a system of recall, which if you had certain built-in safeguards, and if the man was unsatisfactory, you could call an election again.
I have one other question I'd like to ask you. You seem to think that everybody should pay for everything in the way of taxes. Are you aware that folks out my way that are not in any service district are paying more local taxation per family than in any other section of town, including the city of Anchorage and in Spenard? That on the average, we're paying more in local taxes per family than anywhere in the
Getting less
world.
services.
And getting less services for it.
Well, that's for you to rectify, Mary.
The only way I can rectify it in any manner is to help them not get more services that they don't want because they can't pay for it.
Yeah. This is because the appraised value of the houses
This
is
is
higher.
because the appraised value of the footage underneath us.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Parsons?
do you have any,
No, I have nothing further.
no, I was going to ask, do you have any ideas on number of people in the legislative body, or how many people they should represent?
You know, I don't have any firm ideas on this, Jim. I would say that it shouldn't be larger than 10. Divide that up by the number of people that you've got. Maybe you'd want some system if you wanted some compromise between the at-large and the single member. Go to, say, 7 districts elected from single member districts and three people to be elected at large. You know, there aren't any rights or wrongs in this, or blacks and whites. There's all kinds of shades of opinion, and my native city of Minneapolis for years has operated under what's called a strong council, weak mayor form of government. You know, the mayor literally damn near has nothing to do except appoint the chief of police in Minneapolis. On the other hand, the city government through the years has operated reasonably well because people have gotten used to this sort of thing. And, you know, it ticks along, it gets the garbage collected and the police appointed, and there isn't anything, you know, nothing very major has been stolen in years around there.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Evie just told me that the music will continue till 10:15. If we wish to, we can move over to the cafeteria. And I think it would be advisable, if it's all right with all you folks, to go over there. Get a little bit. Cafeteria in East High School to get away from the music. I'll call the meeting back to order. And ask be heard next. Larry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations all of you on your elections. And I should say condolences on getting down the head. My name is Jerry Branchek. I live in that area of town known as the city of Anchorage. I was going through my files the last couple of nights reading out some materials that I've been passed on to you from previous efforts at communication. And that's the stack that I come up with so far. It goes all the way back to the original attempt that I was personally involved with before the effort in communication. Back in 1968, the Borough City Study Group, CIs and Council for Community Improvement, Management Committee of Operation Breakthrough, Congress of Organizations for Unification. Those are all the reference from each of those efforts from the various organizations that I've been involved in, including a considerable amount from the League of Women Voters that I latched onto during the campaign somehow, and I don't know how I got it, but that's it. So if anyone is looking for material from the League resource material, that stack of millions from the League. So that should be a complete record as far as everything that's going on. It isn't filed in any kind of a logical arrangement. Whatever is of value for the commission as a whole.
Will have a job when she gets in office.
I was wondering what they were going to research into. Now I think I see.
It's all there. Particularly, you know, some of the valuable material that the league did was of invaluable assistance during the campaign effort, so it's there. I just got a few comments on concepts of how I would hope you you would approach the task of unification, and a general comment in the end. First off, I hope you don't attempt to write the best charter, because I don't think you can do that and have it pass. I think that your task ought to be to write the best charter that's acceptable to the voters. I think that's an important distinction to make, because the best charter that's acceptable may not be the very best that you could write. I think you should put that aside as far as trying to put in all those great concepts of government and try to approach it politically. Secondly, well, like some of these areas that we're talking about, elected mayor versus appointed mayor, strong mayor, weak mayor, council managers, mayor, council, 7, 9, 11, 15 districts, relationship with the school board, the borough assembly, all of those features that are in a charter type of local government. They're all logical, they're all rational, and they all work. The arguments can be made on both sides. Give me a position, I'll argue it for you on whichever side you want to have evidence on. So it really doesn't make that much difference. I think the main thing for me personally is the personnel that runs it. That's why I really don't care really what we're talking about in that regard, and why I won't pass on to you now. So when you approach it, you approach the document that you drafted as a first-class home rule charter, one that is of a limiting aspect. And again, that's one of those important distinctions that I draw on the type of document, that it's not a granting document, but a limiting document. That when you write it as a skeleton outline. So anything going in is of a limiting aspect. Any particular section, any phrase, every word is a restriction on the act. The second charter, there was an awful lot in there to appease an awful lot of people to try to make people do that. And I think consequently there was enough to pick out in whole. So in that regard, I would put all of these things in there, make it one of a limited another point is this area about decision making. I think that you've been elected sometimes to approve the document. It should be the document alone. And don't give these opinions as far as here's the structure and here's an opinion to see whether they want elected mayor or strong mayor or weak mayor. Give these opinions on the side, whichever favorite they had. Politically speaking, anytime that you create conflict in the minds of the voters, imposing upon them that decision to make, the tendency is for the voter not to go and vote at all, and that's increase the turnout from all the beginning of it. So again, from that standpoint, make the decision yourself on some rational basis, whatever it is. Let it be known that's how it's going to be, and present the document, accept it or reject it, and make it a simple document, period. So there's the only thing that the voters will vote on is the document itself, period. Yes, it will pass, no, it won't pass, period. Don't put any words in there. Last comment that I have is that I think it's going to be difficult to pass unification, more so than the previous two attempts that we had. Even though we're lacking Eagle River, that big block of opposition that we had in the past from the Eagle River group, I think we've progressed in time in the last attempt. I think that there are special interest groups operating, and by special interest groups, I don't mean some sinister group that's operating. I just mean, special interest groups that have a legitimate basis in being, like the teachers groups, right? I don't mean it in any negative context, but there are groups that are in existence now that operate, that have relationships with the two local governments. The borough particularly has grown tremendously since the last attempt, and there are groups that have their established relationships with that government that will be prone not to give them up for something that they don't know or what relationships they will have with the new government. So from that standpoint, I think, again, it'll be more difficult to pass it. So your job will be not only to write the document, but I think it will be to take an active part in the passage of that document, an educational phase as well as the political phase of getting it accepted by the voters. And with that, I'll answer any questions if you like. I will be available throughout the campaign, throughout your effort. Anything that you wish to call upon me, I'll make myself available because I'm a very strong proponent of unification. I think we do need it.
Thank you, Jerry. Are there any questions of Jerry?
Yes, sir.
Mary Froney?
You say a limiting document. One of the things that city council members that have served on the assembly with me are very proud of, that their city council charter is not a limiting document. Just how are you proposing a limiting document without causing considerable objection within the city?
I'm not following. Where would the objection be?
As I understand it, the city charter is not a limiting document.
Well, that's why I prefaced by saying first-class home rule, which in the institutionalizing of the local government, the city of Anchorage being first-class home rule, the borough being a second-class general law.
What do you mean by limiting? That's what I'm trying to get
Having
to.
all those powers that the city council wishes to exercise, the borough having only those powers that are granted to it, 3 mandatory powers, or those specifically conferred by vote of the people. We get into a situation like the borough now, of utilizing the planning power as a broad umbrella to do practically anything, which really ought not to be done the way they're doing it. So what I'm saying is that the first-class home rule concept that all legislative powers, all powers are vested in that council or assembly, whatever it will be, and that whatever action they take is then legal.
All right, then how is it limited then? That to me is unlimited.
Anything that's in that document then limits the action that the council can take. If you wrote nothing, okay, and just said there shall be a city council vested all powers, and the city council could do anything they wanted. So what I'm saying is that when you start making those restrictions on placing it upon the terms of office, what actions they can take or cannot take, the relationship with the school board, all of those features are limiting on the actions that the council or assembly members can take. In other words, if something is not specified in your document, that power then is automatically conferred upon the new assembly or council.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Josephson?
Is Mrs. Froney?
You want a non-limiting document, in other words, without specifying the limitations within it. You want a document that it has no limit, if I understand you right.
I think Mr. Josephson probably thinks so.
This is a little different area. I appreciate your testimony, Jerry. There's one aspect of it, though, that I'm confused about. Because you said not to write the best charter we could and write the best charter that the public would accept, but then we should make the decisions ourselves and tell the public that was how it was going to be. I mean, are those two things? I see some kind of conflict in those statements, but maybe you could show me how I can synthesize them. I mean, if we're going to write the charter with the public, knowing the public is looking over our shoulder and that we are going to be humble about our own philosophies to try and get a broad acceptance, then aren't we going to be consulting the public through polling and other means all the way through to find out what the public wants?
Perhaps I shouldn't have thrown them together as closely as I did, the confusing aspect. You're taking all the testimony as far as the input of the public is concerned, so it'll all be a consideration as far as what you do right. When you make a decision For example, the role of the mayor, the powers of the mayor, whether it be weak mayor or strong mayor concept. The decision is yours to make which it's going to be. Whichever way you decide to go on it, based upon whatever factors you decide are important that you weigh, from the public testimony to your own experience to whatever you're going to write. Make that decision known. That's your decision to make. And make that decision, let that decision be known. And under that regard, if that becomes then the best document, then that is the best document. Now, it may be that you'll uncover some factors that will tip the balance in favor of one over the other, weak versus strong, which will have an effect like, we'll say, the editorial page. Right? If the controlling aspect of the editorial page is violently opposed to one concept over the other, I think that should be a factor involved, because politically speaking, that can be very detrimental. It was in the first attempt. It was neutralized in the second attempt. Now, I'm not saying do that, but I think that is a consideration to take into account when you do write the document.
Mr. Chairman?
Lisa, Parker?
Mr. Brancheck, if you feel that these public interest groups might work against us because of their relationship with the two present governments, why do you think the charter, why do you think we're sitting here writing a charter? Why was this voted in?
I think the special interest groups are working against.
We'll be working against our charter when it comes before the voters.
We'll take the public employee sector, employees of the city and employees of the borough. That's a special interest group. They have a special interest in state, right? Their particular job. If they're not assured of what's going to happen, they can easily vote against it, which there was in one attempt. The opposition of the employees to the document itself, because there were provisions that were unclear until the Charter Commission came back and cleared them up. Now that's a large sector involved that has to be accommodated within the document. The teachers, the professionals involved in that aspect have to be accommodated, their viewpoints, and also they have to be educated as far as what's going to happen in the charter once it's passed. That's what I was referring to.
So as long as we educate
It's a
as to
dual role.
what we're doing, then we hopefully will be okay.
You're not operating in a sterile vacuum. Whatever you do has to have the impact on what you decide.
Oh, yeah.
Are there other questions? Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chai? Jerry, I'm still not clear. You said don't make it a granting charter, but a limiting charter. Right?
Right?
What is the distinction when you say limit?
Okay, if I recall, correct me if I'm wrong, Dick, but didn't we run into that on the first charter on the Human Rights Commission argument or the controversy? There was very strong testimony to place in the document mandating the creation of a Human Rights Commission within the local government body. Right? Okay. I personally don't think anything fits in there. The power to create that Human Rights Commission, just by virtue of the fact that it's a first-class home rule city. It has no place, it's not needed in the document.
Okay.
Is that clear?
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, you're saying it exactly right, but
Yeah.
it's the opposite of what it sounds like. In fact, the Assembly does have the power, and you limit it as judiciously as possible. But you also do not tell it what it has to do. That's
Here, Section 11 of the Constitution of the State of Alaska. A home rule borough or city may exercise all legislative powers not prohibited by law or by charter. And it's that concept that I'm referring to.
Mr. Chairman?
Restricted.
Let's take the question of an ombudsman. There we have a public opinion poll, if you will, indicating that might be proper for charter inclusion. And there, the argument can be made that reference to an ombudsman in the charter gives the ombudsman greater prestige or clout in his day-to-day dealings with other
officials of government because he is created by the basic document. Would that be an area where, under the philosophy you've indicated, you feel we should perhaps let that be done by legislation rather than by the charter, or is that a different case?
I think that, particularly in the case of the ombudsman, and that happened in the last one, was one of the exceptions to the rule. And that's one of those areas that, because of the great interest in that, in the ombudsman concept, because I think you can give it more prestige, more power by naming it in the document, that it can't easily be placed in there. In fact, I think there's great benefits in putting it in there for the sake of its passage. Because of that, the acceptance by the public overwhelmingly that that's a concept that they tend to favor. So I could very easily see that put in as part of the Constitution.
Thank you.
Chairman, Mr. Parsons.
Along the same line, Jerry, school teachers do not want a line item veto for legislation. Therefore, we should put that in because it's popular and they'll be against it the same way.
Are you asking me whether or not it should go
Well,
in there?
we're saying that ombudsman is popular and it'll help pass the charter as a motherhood kind of thing. You see, rather than on a philosophy of government, that's what I hear you saying.
Okay.
And a line item veto is a negative issue as far as teachers are concerned.
Okay, that's a special interest group now.
Yes.
Whereas the ombudsman, we're talking about the concept of the voters as a whole. That's what I was referring to, is that's one of those exceptions to the rule that
My point is that I think others will have exceptions to the
exactly,
rule
and
as well.
that gets back to the other point of not writing that best charter, of writing the best charter that will pass. And that's this thing of the veto power or not veto power. You're going to face that down the line, and you'll have to make that decision. No?
Well, I'm just thinking that there's a point at which even those of us who favor unification might want to forego the whole experience if we keep retreating back from the optimum document. I mean, we might be better off, someone may argue, with the home rule charter for the city of Anchorage and the general law for the second-class borough than even the benefits of unification under a charter that that has all of these compromises and palliatives in it. That's not to belabor an argument with you. I just think that we could reach that point, though, where those of us who advocate it might say, gee, that we've just given up too much.
That's the same thing that very first Charter Commission sat down with, and I was just as idealistic at that time, is that, by God, we've got the chance to do it, let's do it right. But over the interim of the last few years, it hasn't done us a bit of good to have the best charter because we didn't have it. It didn't pass. I would have much easier settled for something that wasn't quite the best, just to have had it in effect. And that's my worry now, is that if you write that best charter and it doesn't pass, it's all futile, it's worthless. And that's why, again, approach it politically in a good context. Because politics is nothing more than that resolving the conflict of public issues. And so I don't use political issues in a negative connotation.
Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering in relation to your idea that allow some sort of method of changing or amending the charter, leaving that open so that people felt they could amend it or change it, they would be more happy to pass it, knowing they could change the things that come up in the future to which they expect to possibly disagree.
Those are things that I see as being mandatory in the charter. That the amendment procedure, initiative, referendum, and recall are all mandatory parts in the charter because those are limiting aspects on local government. Those are powers that are reserved specifically to the people, and that provisions on which the people can exercise their powers are in there, and they're specifically mentioned.
There's another thing that I myself felt was very unfortunate on the last chart, was that in this recall, when the people would be allowed to vote, you had to get a petition. Petition had to be signed by, I think they said 5% of the registered voters. And in my opinion, I thought that was too high because it would be too difficult for them to get that many signatures in time to get the vote needed to change what people were against.
There's materials in there that it started out at 20%.
Ma'am, would you mind identifying yourself?
I think even 5 is high. I think 3 should be.
Ma'am, would you mind identifying yourself for the
I am
tape?
Helen Dodd. I did run area-wide, and I did not get the area-wide, but I got far more votes than I ever expected. Without paying off hardly
Appreciate
any
you
money.
being here too.
Without paying over $15.
Are there other questions? Jerry, I know you have another meeting and appreciate your being here and do appreciate the volume of research material.
If everything rolls down the line, I'm available, and I do want to help make sure that this does pass from the citizen standpoint, from organizing any group that you want to put it together. The other thing that's in there, we can go through, there's the list of all the people that were active in previous campaigns. I think we had at the last one somewhere around 250 people. The list of all the persons that were involved in the campaign for it is also in there. So as a resource, we want to set up some citizens committees and we put research for it.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Mr. Johnson?
I'm Burl Johnson, and I live in this area and in the city of Anchorage. And I wanted to follow Bill Barnes pretty closely because I'm amazed to learn that Bill and I agree so completely with mass transit and disagree so completely in almost all the issues that he cited in his earlier statement. First, I simply second everything that Jerry said as far as the kind of document we hope to write, but I think that I would say don't run scared in the sense that I still believe that if the objections had been answered, I think there was maybe too much time and effort spent in trying to say we must get rid of all the reasons why we shouldn't have to, instead of arguing with the points that was really of serious contention in both the past charges. So my hope is that as the commission, you keep us all informed and you don't run scared. I happen to oppose the city manager council form, and I have lived in the city and never lived in the borough, and I am no advocate of the present setup out in the borough and the conflicts that we have and the inadequacies we may have. But I have worked not only as a citizen trying to get something through a problem solved on the city level, I have also worked on the city commissions and tried to function effectively. And I strongly believe that whatever government we have, be it national, state, or local, responsibility must be clear, and the buck has to stop someplace. And it does not stop anywhere on the manager-council form. It's impossible to find out why a certain thing cannot be done, because The city manager may only be the administrator on paper, and he may only serve from Tuesday to Tuesday. But the truth of the matter is that he is the only full-time, except now we have George on full-time, but he hasn't any real power. So he's there, but he isn't there. However, the city manager is working full-time with a great deal of power, and he does much more than administer our city. He sets policy because the council disposes, and he poses, and he disposes also. In other words, orders of the council do not go down to the departments, excepting as the city manager wants those orders to go down. And you must have a strong city manager, a capable administrator, in order to administer anything as big as we are. And yet, when he is that strong, he wants to run the place. And the council is a part-time situation, and they do not have the grasp on the day-to-day operation. So that, and this situation can go on 3, 4, and 5 years until personality conflicts may finally cause the council to let the city manager go. But I don't ever think that they let them go because because of the real faults, because he has been mayor and city manager at the same time. There is no question out in the Borough Assembly. I happen to think that I, as a taxpayer, benefit from the friction between the Assembly and the mayor. That you on the Assembly are showing up all his faults, and he, as a mayor, a strong mayor, is just as determined to show you yours. And this conflict can only benefit me, because both of you have to keep on your toes. And I, as a taxpayer, am too far from government and too busy to do the kind of checking that you are doing on each other. And I like it. And I know if the borough, where the responsibility is, Jack Roderick is the mayor, and you just give him the money and he spends it, and if it doesn't go around, it's his fault. And that is why I believe we have a much more responsive government to my needs. And it may be annoying to hear them bicker back and forth, but that bickering only helps me, the taxpayer. And that's the way I see it, in my experience in trying to get a problem through both the borough and the city. I happen also to disagree with Bill on I no longer believe in at large, and for years being a city resident, I strongly felt that we did not want the so-called ward system. However, I am opposed to a single-member district for the simple reason that much as I admire Ed Willis, I do not believe that is a good situation. I do not believe Ed Willis could ever have been moved out of Eagle River because, however, if there had been 3 members from every district, then they again are checking on each other, and nobody in that district can then build up his own power organization. And this again, I think John Q. Public can only benefit by that friction between those 3 people, and that kind of watching that each one does, so that no one of the 3 rises too high nor gains too much control. This again, I think John Q. Public will benefit, and that's our concern in government. The one area in the conflict of interest that I believe is written into the city charter and I think is inadequate, and I think you should write a stronger conflict of interest. I do not believe that the assembly or council, whatever you choose to call it, and I think names are unimportant, I do not believe the assembly should have the right to tell someone who owns a piece of property in the block that's about to be rezoned that he doesn't have a conflict, or they're sure that he will vote truly and for the benefit of the people at large, and therefore you allow him to go ahead and vote. And this happens all the time in the city council, and it happens in the assembly. And I do not think that John Public's interest is protected with that kind of a situation. Yeah. Sure.
May I interrupt you?
Sure.
There's a problem in that, I think, in that when you, and I'd like you to expand on your ideas about what that conflict of interest provision should be, because when the elected official is compelled to disqualify himself from voting because of a conflict, the citizens he represents are disenfranchised. And in that regard, it's different from disqualifying a judge in a courtroom, because they just send another judge down and nothing different really happens. But in a legislative situation, this is a problem, I think. And I wonder if you could address that and specify how that conflict should be handled.
I think it's there, and that for that very reason, I do not believe, this may sound very strange, but I believe that certain people with certain interests are not eligible for city office, for public office, because they cannot operate without conflict.
Name a few.
The banker. Yes, I think it's very difficult for Elmer Rasmussen when he sat on the city council. He could not have anybody coming before him. Mr. Reed is a banker, but he is in the charter commission. He has different problems. But I do not believe
His bank has different problems.
A big real estate developer is sitting on the assembly or council has serious problems constantly. You see, he has such very special interests that can he ever see the great generators? I don't know. But I do believe that, and that is why I think the public has to look very carefully, of course, who they elect to office. But I do believe that our conflict of interest is just ignored by the assembly and the council.
Johnson, do you, as long as you're a strong supporter of the strong mayor, do you think he should be required to hire a professional manager to assist him in the business of taking care of that government?
Yes.
Should that professional manager be ratified by the legislative body?
No.
Would there be?
I can't see the sentence.
Okay. When you put a mayor in charge of what will be a multi-million-dollar operation, should there be any specific requirements or qualifications for his job that he should have other than being a resident of Anchorage to be able to manage that kind of a business?
No. Anymore, our governor is required to have, except the elected.
Mr. Chai? Mr. Johnson, apparently you favor a strong mayor situation. What happens if you get a weak mayor? I mean, we have strong people now, but 3 years from now, 4 years from now, we get a weakling in there. Then how do you handle that situation?
Then, of course, your assembly, a great deal more has to be on its toes. A great deal more than we would be, perhaps, although you should always be on your toes. But hopefully he will have hired a capable administrator, and then hopefully the public becomes aware of it in 3 years and moves him out. However, if he was so, of course, I think just maybe, I don't know whether the public feels that inefficiency is a cause for recall. We've endured inefficiency in the past, so
Well, the point is, in writing a charter, we can't write it around personalities. We have to write it around a set of rules.
That's right.
What is the protective thing we would use against the weak mayor?
A strong, active assembly.
Are there any other questions? Yes. Ms. Parker?
If you are opposed to single-member districts, what type of enforcement would you favor?
I was very pleased with the multiple idea. In other words, three in a district and being elected at odd every
That's
different year.
consistent.
I like that.
And no one at large.
And no one at large. I think you put a tremendous responsibility on those people who run at large. You ask them to be the senators and House representatives. I just don't see it at all.
Are there other questions?
One more.
Mr. Joseph?
Have you any ideas about the staff for the assembly? You speak of the need to have an active assembly, and you mentioned the powers implicit in the city manager form because the assemblymen or councilmen are part-time. Have you thought about that issue?
Yes, you have. I think the Assembly presently is very inadequately served by having to depend on the administration of the staff. You have your own clerk, and you should be able to know that the materials that you are going to have, the kind of information that you desperately need. Yes, you have to upgrade your staff in order for you to function, because you do have to have all the facts in order to make the decisions. And you don't think you get them all, and you get them reluctantly in the presidency.
Should that be in the charter?
Again, I think I favor Jerry's as little as possible. But I hadn't thought of that because I'm opposed to very many specifics in the charter.
Mr. Chai? You said you favored Mr. Abramczyk on the method of writing the charter. Do I understand that what you're saying is that the Charter Commission will take all the public testimony it can, screen it all, then they will write the charter based upon their best knowledge and their best feel, based upon his public opinion, but they will make the decision of what final view is in it?
Yes, I would be very distressed if when I came to vote on the charter, I had also to decide for you what name you wanted to call it, what name you wanted to call the assembly, whether you wanted a mayor or a chairman. I think those are the kind of decisions we elected you to make.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Carol.
I'm Karen Chana, and first of all, I'd like to ask.
Before you go any further, it's 8:45, and I figure when you are done, we'll take a couple minutes to stand up and walk around and whatever, and then begin again. And could I get an expression of how many more people would like to be heard tonight? One, two, five. Go ahead, please.
I have a couple of questions asked about the function, not the function of the commission itself, but how the commission will function during this short term time. I know when you have a short setup or a short period of time to do some functioning, there's a lot of things that go by the wayside as far as setting up and where you're going to have an office, the physical, actual physical things, and it's so important that the public knows. I say it's the communications, the fact that you exist.
We have a charter production committee. We have a public information committee, a transitional detail committee, and a public opinion research committee. Those committees will function out of an office not yet chosen. We do have a secretary, Heavy Walters now. We are still looking for a recording secretary. Vicki Almeida from the city is helping us out temporarily. And we do have an attorney, Mr. Garnett, I think he's down at the end of the table there, to advise us in those cases where we feel we need.
All this is fine. Excuse me for interrupting you, but in the interest of time. All this is very fine. What I'm trying to say is the public every day should be aware of just where we are. I think the biggest thing that has killed this in the past is lack of anybody feeling like it was important until the time came to stop putting it in.
There's our schedule as we set it out. This is the schedule prepared by management committee that Fred Chai and Mary Froney and Bill Sheffield and Jane Angbrick. I was amazed and somewhat appalled at the speed with which they felt we could get it done. And we're working with that in mind, that over here on August 12th, we're going to be able perhaps to present a charter to the people. We are also looking to some what might be necessary in the way of a little bit of change down at this end, but not very much. Mr. Fisher?
Can we ask Ms. Channing what she, is that right, Channing? Chanan. What you might suggest to us to make the public aware of where our office is and what's going on?
I think a very, very close liaison with both papers. I know perhaps you might not get all the response you would like to get, editorial or otherwise, either end or the paper. But I think it's very important that daily, in the front section, somewhere in the front section, at least a couple of 3 times a week, that specifics are mentioned of where you are. Each time mentioning where you can be gotten a hold of, what you're doing. It's important. It's a news item. I was really appalled at how I found out the meeting was tonight. Until I found out we just got a secretary a couple of days ago. That explains it all.
Didn't you see it?
Yesterday.
I saw a notice of a public meeting, and it says notice of public meeting, that it's going to be at East High, and it mentioned no time. East High is a complex. Yeah.
Well, the daily
So
news had
this morning's paper, finally, this morning, this is last week, I scheduled, like a lot of you, schedule our meetings.
This was just for your information,
Yeah, but I don't want to make this
not by way of explanation, but for information. This was put in the paper, was supposed to run 5 days. It was pulled because there was a misunderstanding, and I took it down and laid it down on the desk, and it didn't say 7:30 in East High. It said chorus room East High, but it didn't say
no time.
it didn't say 7:30, which was what it was supposed to be.
So I attempted to call a couple of members without much luck because everybody's busy during the day. And I said, well, it's not important. I'll say Tuesday. So this morning's paper comes out, and I finally find what time it is.
One of the reasons that this morning's paper came out is because that happened. And we called the papers and asked them, please, to get it out in any way they could. And they were very kind in really getting to it.
Well, I appreciate the
better than we should.
What the whole point thing, this is just, pointing out this sort of thing is what will kill this before it gets off the ground.
Mr. Chairman?
Input and all.
Mr. Parsons?
I'm curious about the same area, because if you work with both the papers here, it's a pretty selective thing on what they're going to put in. I'm in a number of organizations that want to get publicity, and we are at the point sometimes where we figure that we're going to have to spend money to advertise to get, and we feel very uncomfortable about spending public funds for this kind of thing.
But you shouldn't have to. Well, I won't go into that. I have a few points to make. One is information, almost daily. Where are we going to get hold of people? Where are you doing this? Whatever special interest it is, somebody hit you over the head on a hotline. Whatever, it's not important how. Daily. Somebody, somewhere in this town, must be talking about what's the Charter Commission doing. What's their schedule, their
Putting
pay
it in the
schedule.
calendar section of the newspapers. Each one has a calendar section for each day.
But
And they
they-
publish it
This is for me
on
and me.
Sunday, and then they publish it in each paper every day.
But we're selling, the whole idea is to be sold to the general public. They want 8% turnout or some such thing. 5%, is required to change anything. And a number of, 8%, 10% vote for this whole thing. And maybe 2 or 3% of those even sort of follow the government. If you're always voting now, we're going to go out and vote, whether they know anything about it or not, because it's their civic duty. Now, 2 or 3 of these percent have followed it because it's in the calendar where we look for the community things. What I'm saying is daily, as a news item, drop some in here, drop the dancing girls. Get it in
Great,
front of us.
I'm with you, Karen.
The big point I want to make was I think whatever the mechanics of this charter are going to turn out, like it might not please me, and it may not please her, and they argue about it anyway. But the fact that everybody knew it was going to be here, we have a very small percentage of people who consider this their town. A lot of them are just passing through, or always pass through wherever they live. And there's a few people that are concerned, and there's an awful lot of people that could be concerned if you got them interested. I'm making a big to-do about a big thing.
Thank you, we appreciate it.
Great.
I want to know how, I read an article very briefly that this is funded for the balance of or the rest of your fiscal year. Where's the establishing of the fiscal year and what is it?
To June 30.
June 30?
Yes.
And then how will you fund this after June 30 since you have an interim?
We have a budget committee working now to bring a budget to present to the Borough Assembly for their approval for the balance of the fiscal year.
Well, that was just a very small question.
For the new fiscal year. They are in the budget process now and very close to time when we've got to get it in to be within their budget year.
Okay, well, that was just a small question I had. One more, I'd like to comment on this for a company. I like the idea, the concept of small districts. I know it makes for top-heavy government. I mean, you know, you have 15 people in a room, they aren't going to be able to come to consensus. I mean, they'll have a much slower coming to a consensus, probably, than if you only had 5 people in the room, or 9 people in the room, or 11, or whatever. However, we have 160,000 people in this area, and I think the very smallest constituency that would be acceptable and really be represented would be about 16,000. Now, that's a very small constituency.
How many?
To me, about 16,000. That's 10.
10.
Well, you don't have an even number, I understand, these things at the end of how you vote. So you have 9 or 11. Now, that'd be about as small as you could get to still represent. Yeah, the problem with that is the small districts, or the 3-member district mentioned by Mr. Johnson, that would mean you'd have 3 districts, or maybe 4. You know the size of those districts. We have that problem right now where people in the Briggs subdivision on Muldoon are represented by the same person who represents the problems of the hillside. Now, there's no way is there any kind of the same problems other than, you know, the other problem that I'm a person and you are a person and we all have bills. Now, it's about as close, as common as, you know, we've all got taxes. It's about the only common ground they have. You have the same person is representing them. And if the person comes from more of the hillside area, they've got enough problems in their hands just representing the hillside area problems. The Briggs subdivision is more closely tied to, say, Chester Valley or the Muldoon Strip. And so the representation of a single person, or I mean, a single person in this area, what I'm saying, you have 4 great big districts, and you have 3 people from one area, which you can suggest, then those 3 people can very well all be from the hillside area, or all very well be from Chester Valley, and where hillside's left out in the cold, and we're districted the way we are now with these monstrous districts. It's bad representation. Either we have to end up being top-heavy with too many people to be terribly efficient. That's why I would, as an aside, recommend a paid executive administrator, city manager, whatever you want to call it, mostly for that reason. We need an administrator, and they need the political body, and they'll rub each other raw all the time. But what I'm saying is representation, I think, would be better if we had, I hate to say it, a large cumbersome body, just because the people who do need to call somebody when their dog needs to be walked. The guy out in Hillside knows he's going to be running up through Glen Ounce to collect that dog. Whereas the guy in Chester Valley is just going to say, oh, I'm going to run down the block. I know that dog lives around the corner, and I know where he hangs out. I mean, that's a simplification, but this is what people want. People want to know that the guy who lives around the corner across town, across the street, can pass the same problems that me and Pete have. And we're worried about their 4-acre lots versus their 75 by 150 foot lots. People want to know the person they talk to understands them. That's why the ombudsman is so important. Anyway, that's about all the comments I'm going to make tonight. Yeah.
May I have comment on that, sir?
Mary Froney?
I'm your hillside representative. I think that you can thank the city council for having the 3-man representation in the south of town. I was the strongest proponent for a single-man district, and they thought they could fix me by putting me in half of Anchorage instead of a single-man district. And that was their way of doing it, by including more of that, and by getting a 3-man district in the south of town, where we're already so spread out that when I was in a single district, I still had a quarter of Anchorage to handle, because the population in that particular part of town is more spread out than anywhere else. As a single-man district, I still had a quarter of Anchorage geographically to cover. And they thought they'd really fix me by putting me in a 3-man district that had such diverse things. And it was intentional to get Mary that they put me in the 3-man district instead of put a 2-man district down there when they did the redistricting. I'm not bragging. That just happens to be the way politically that it was managed.
Are there any other comments or questions? Mr. Chai?
Karen, you've placed great emphasis on public information and getting the word out. Do you feel it's proper once the charter is written, once this commission arrives at what they feel is a charter that's acceptable? Do you feel that it's objectionable if these commissioners got out and marketed this charter or sold it to the public?
No, not sold it in the terms of PR selling or slips or these fancy things the city puts out once a year telling us where our utility bills get spent. I think that would absolutely turn off to everybody in their living rooms. I think the best thing the charter did last time, I simply might have been able to manage better if there was more time, money. Where are the little political caucuses that you have, or coffees? Because this gets the gal across the street that'll go because her neighbor asked her. She didn't know the first thing about a charter. She never really thought about it. All she knows is she goes to the polls every so often, because it's the American thing to do. I'd say there's 3 people I know to every one that everybody I know votes, and 3 to 1 votes on that basis. 2 days before, they went back to back into their paper and say, I like him, and her, or him, whichever, how liberated they are. And off the polls they go, because it's the American thing to do. These coffees are the best thing in the world. You get a political education from coffees, because you get people who are involved and are talking back and forth, and all this gal saying, hey, this is really interesting. I didn't know that. Every coffee I've been to has been made up 50-50 of people that have been involved and are excited about it or are arguing about it. And, hey, I didn't know that. And then they're arguing at the next one. That's what it's all about. That's what this charter, I think, is going to get off the ground.
Lisa?
Public money should be spent to...
The money could be spent for this sort of thing, but only on a minimal basis, not in slicks, not on the New York Madison Avenue culture. This is where it's in New York. It's got to work in Anchorage.
Mr. Parker?
Mr. Shai has a question.
You mentioned you mentioned the desirability of the taxpayer and constituent having a close feeling with his or her representative in local government. One of the problems we have here is the fact that most projections of Anchorage indicate substantial population growth that would occur during the life of this charter if it were approved by the voters. Have you any feelings as to that, as to what that might suggest about the size of the legislative body? In other words, one might represent 15,000 people in 1975, and in the same district in 1990 represent 40,000 people.
Well, this is true of school districts. I mean, you can say the same about school districts. They can project all they want as the population moves around. I'm not suggesting that I know enough to say how to draw your line.
No, my question wasn't to the apportionment plan, because that could be done to...
What are you asking about that?
No, I'm asking about the size of the body, what that might have to be fixed.
I don't think the size of the body should be tied that closely. Or to say there are processes for amending something that becomes unwieldy. The whole thing is publication, is the communication with the public. Everybody sits around in their living rooms, and all they know is that they're angry because the city council or the borough assembly has done something that has affected their life. That's all they ever care about, 90% of them. It affected them personally, some action they took. There's not enough dissemination. The problems they're unwieldy. Someone's got to come up with a suggestion somewhere along the way. The government is becoming unwieldy, and get out the coffee clutches and make a movement to increase the district, increase the areas, change the areas, what have you. I don't think it should be limited in the charter, though. I think it should say somewhat, the word initially should be such and such, should be changed by the referendum process or whatever the process is to change. People got to know that that charter is going to be changeable after buy it. They got to know it's flexible. They can change it if they have to.
I want to ask you, are you speaking that if we started off with 11, which would be somewhere between 14 and 16,000 people representing each person, are you recommending that when you say you get up to 25, that then you add a district, redistrict, so that you're back down to representing about 16,000?
I don't know enough about government apportionment. Apportionment just blew my mind on this whole state apportionment, city apportionment, borough apportionment. The whole apportionment routine that's been going on becomes so confusing to me that I'm not even going to venture. I don't know. You guys are the experts.
Well, I'm wanting to know whether you want to get back down to where it's the minimum number being represented again.
Well, there should be a minimum maximum in anybody's governmental philosophy. It should be hammered out by the representatives of the people. I'm not saying here we go again, tie this charter down to specifics. You're going to write a document, write it and outline it. For God's sakes, let the people know that they're going to be represented within reason. The guy's not going to represent 100,000 people.
Well, it is difficult when population does tend to concentrate in some areas. You may at times get one district getting a little bit top heavy, while some of the other districts haven't changed much in population. And what I'm trying to find out is, do you want it in the charter as to what will cause a redistricting?
Language in the charter should be very limited. I don't mean limiting, I mean limited. I think it should be bare bones outlines. The process, the referendum process or the changeable process should be a very large, publicized portion of that, and let the people write it over. It's going to be awful messy the first few years. Let's say, why did we ever get a charter for it? The bad government was better than this mess that we have in our hands. Then no changes. But you've got to start somewhere. I don't know. I don't know enough about local government. I'm just saying how I feel about representation. These are government experts here.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. We'll take about a 4 or 5 minute break, and after the break I'll ask Mr. Ward next.
Of course, that is not the trend with the Northern Commercial and JCPenney's and the parking garage and certain amounts of public land that we have. In the Dawn proposal that I've seen before, I think that's the one that came closest, because as I recall, it brought in, say, a department store, and then they had living and also office above that. But can we normally expect to see it?
I think that, again, it's economics. I think if a developer took the gamble and put together a project like that, it would be a feasible project. There are people who would prefer to live and work and shop in the same building and never go outdoors in the wintertime. You get them.
Fairbanks is full of them.
Well, yeah, doesn't that work in Fairbanks? And
Sure does.
it seems to me that it really is adapted to the climate that we live in.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. But, nobody so far has had the dough and the gambler instinct to put one of those together here, and I think it would be a successful project if he can go ahead or whoever. I've often thought, that the best way to retire in this country would be to build a small office building, put a house on top, and move in. There was somebody that was going to do that. Well, there are a few like that here. If you go around and really look at what's here in town, there are a few buildings of that sort here where people live very comfortably on the top.
McKay does it. It's also in Alaska. Is it
I don't know whether they're still in there or not, but it could be.
I think some law firm just took it over.
Hill's apartment over here on the 4th Avenue Theater has been that way. It's a pleasant place to live.
Part of the structures we have here already are going to mitigate some of the fears that we have about, everybody being 8-story or
Because they're still economic
Because they're economically
projects.
viable. They're going to be for some period
The
of
thing
time.
is, what happens 20 years from now when one of those is torn down, and you build 2 new ones on each side, what can you put in?
Here.
I think everybody's fear in looking at this two-dimensional thing with these lines on it, and then assuming that everybody's going to be in agreement, and it's going to happen. I'm familiar with other communities. Still maintain diversity. Just look at the way it is now, and the bonus point is simply the person that has the money and puts their own property is just going to increase that diversity.
That's one thing that I like to know about Valley Street, and that's right. This idea of north-south openness through the town. One way to get that is stair-step your setbacks for various stories away from those main corridors, so that, those setbacks were greater than we would normally have in the balance of the area.
Some communities will take an angle, a certain angle, a certain distance back from the corner.
Reconvene, ask Mr. Ward to speak.
Thank you. I believe that in many cases the discussion implies an overcomplicating of the issues, and I think that it could be simplified by doing this, that you first consider that the state, how the state constitution spells out the home rule powers, and at least until it might be amended at some time, and then proceed to write the limiting document. This simplification could start with a meaningful preamble, which would state the intent of the charter. And this intent should be to protect individual rights and to cater to no special interest, regardless of how valid such interests might be. I mean valid interests in the personal sense. They may be very obviously valid to each person or individual group, but not a valid public interest. An example of this could be with regard to the unions. I think it's very important to stress the importance of keeping local government controllable by the electorate, and I think you could indicate a confidence in the electorate's wisdom. Don't write in such a manner that which would imply that you have to do so much for the electorate. Assume that people can do for themselves and in fact grow wiser by their doing. Write in some kind of safeguard to prevent government from steamrolling over the individual. For example, prohibit charging a citizen for services whether he wants or needs them. This would very effectively put confidence in the charter by the average individual.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask a question right there. How can that be accomplished, sir?
How can it be accomplished? Very simply. Just write it in the charter.
All right, then I live in the middle of the city of Anchorage and I do not want to receive fire protection. And I declare that to the local government, therefore I should not pay ad valorem taxes in relation to the fire protection.
Mary,
Is that what you're saying?
I was thinking more specifically with regard to the sewer assessments if you don't need or want it, and that should make sense to you in the hillside area. I was thinking also of the refuse collection. Presently, the city of Anchorage has an ordinance requiring one to use it whether he needs it or wants it.
Mary, if we may, let's have Ward finish his presentation and then reserve our questions for then. Well,
the charter, or the previous charter commissions have dealt, charters have dealt with schools to some degree, and I think we needed on state and national level tax credits for private schools. This could also be incorporated on the local level, since some real estate taxes are used for school purposes. So we don't have to wait for the state and federal government on this. We could grant tax credits to individuals sending their children to private schools. I heartily agree with someone who commented that government is becoming unwieldy, so let us attempt to simplify it. I also think that if taxing is to be a valid concept, we ought not to exempt churches. It is my personal belief that they don't have any special in that I do not have. So we should consider taxing them on their property and any businesses they have. We should have no local government sanctioned monopolies, such as utilities. If someone can set up a business which is in competition with the established utilities, permit them to do so. They save the taxpayer money and competition is usually efficient. I think we ought to encourage it. Tax reform is, of course, overdue, and this would have much very hard to say too on all levels. I think also that elections should be final. Elections are not carried out that quickly, but what the wording of the propositions on the ballot could be examined and stated, yes, this should be easily understandable to the electorate. After the election, there should be no such thing as setting up some commission to study to determine whether the electorate understood what they were voting for. It's happened on the state level, happened in Mat-Su borough, I know, recently. So, not necessarily setting up a commission, but the essence of that happened. It allows for too much political hanky-panky. I think that the human relations aspect should be strictly voluntary. We do not need a human relations commission to guarantee the rights of individuals
regarding minorities or otherwise, that all of this is guaranteed in our U.S. Constitution, and this could be incorporated into the charter to let people know that the Charter Commission heartily agrees with what we have in our U.S. Constitution, and might encourage the electorate to read that document. That's essentially all I have for now.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Are there any questions of Mr. Ward?
No, but I think to clarify one thing, I don't think we can function in the area of taxing churches. I believe this is excluded by the state. You should be talking to the legislature about that. And the reason I bring that out is that we're going to find there's a lot of areas, this Charter Commission is going to find a lot of areas that we can't deal in, such as that. So please, when you see the first draft of the document come out, don't be too critical until you ask us why it didn't exclude churches or didn't tax churches, for instance, because it may be that we didn't have any choice in that matter. Please, I appreciate that.
Are there other questions? Aaron?
I have a comment back to the PR routine. There is nothing wrong with a nice, well-stated preamble. It has its selling points. You know, we sold our Constitution with that beautiful preamble. We have a kid in school loves the preamble. It has, there's real possibilities of writing a short, succinct, but beautiful preamble. They can hang their hats on. That talks in common language. What if I get above the legalese of charters?
Thank you, Mr. Ward. I do want to tell you that we do appreciate your coming to our meetings.
Thank you. I appreciate your
Mr. Chairman, could I ask Mr. Ward how he feels about districts and representation?
About what? Districts of representation for the legislative body?
I think that it's probably best to have them selected by district and definitely not at large. And for example, in the Muldoon area where there's 3 representatives at large, this could easily be sliced into appropriate districts, 3 ones to permit the representatives easier access to constituents.
Or any other questions? Mr. Walker, you wish to be here, heard?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, may I sit here, or do you want me to?
Can you talk loud enough to be heard? That's the main thing.
Chairman Reed, I'll try. I sometimes need to be prodded, but when I do, I don't hesitate.
Ira Walker.
My name is Ira Walker. I live in County East, 6208 Stadium Drive. On the little sheet, I'll try to briefly follow your comments on the questions that's put here. I personally would prefer an elected mayor part-time primarily with a qualified manager, whatever you might wish to call him, whether you call him a manager or some other title. But usually a man that has been trained professionally can do a better job than you or I or the run-of-the-mill, although I do think that it should be a strong individual, and I think your mayor should as well be a strong individual. Either one can govern adequately if they're strong, or if they are weak, then we have no governing ability. My opinion, despite that my good friend Mr. Atwood says that we shouldn't have wards, I'm still strongly believe that we should have individual representation on districts. districts should be somewhat homogeneous, not encompass large areas of vacant land and particularly populated areas at the same time. Because those districts, those representatives, assemblymen, councilmen, whatever you wish to call them, should represent their constituency. They should be accessible to the residents of their particular district so that they just know what is wanted of them. I think I covered this rather well. I have a few brief comments. Many of you know me quite well and know my philosophy of life, that I believe the least government is the best government. The simplest form of government is best for all of us. The least amount of interference with government with the affairs of business and the affairs of our lives, the better we are. So from that you might say that I would recommend a limited charter. I would. Basically I would like to see a bare bones, a skeleton, an outline form of a charter that can be fleshed out as needed by the legislative body, whatever that might be called. I would definitely like to see some limitation on taxing power, where that as it is now, our taxes have mushroomed under our borough administration, the borough system of government, until very few of us can afford to pay them. I own 75 acres of ground. I pay $45,000 a year in taxes. I just wish that they would take what's left and let me keep the 45. I'd be happy. Many states, many counties and other states have developed limitations on taxation, how much they can actually be assessed on a given area. My old home state of New Mexico, for instance, is one that has evolved the situation that the tax assessor assesses it's all by county there, but if the tax assessor assesses the ground high enough, you can sell it to him, and the county has to buy it for the price it is assessed. And were that the case today, the borough would own mine right now. But I bring this out because we are being taxed out of existence. No longer afford to own property. There are other things that are concerned that I'm very, very concerned about, and that is the increasing bureaucracy of our governments, state and local, but primarily on the local, where we have regulatory boards. We really don't have any recourse. The voter doesn't have any recourse to the board. It's fine to have advisory boards. The city of Anchorage has advisory boards that are not all powerful. The borough has advisory boards that have their own way. If a board or a commission is created that in any effects goes ahead and promulgates regulations that are in effect law, we might as well forget writing this charter. Because when you get it written, the commissions are going to promulgate regulations that will, in effect, destroy what you've written. So I think that we should preclude regulatory boards and commissions being created. More bureaucracies hung around our necks. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have to say.
Are there any questions, Jane?
Yes.
Thank you.
I was just wondering with the complex things that government gets into at this time, if you prefer not to have regulatory boards, would that mean that every issue of an individual that they'd like to bring to the government would have to come before the legislative body?
Advisory boards can advise. Your ordinances should be promulgated by your legislative body. Your electorate has recourse to that legislative body. They don't have recourse. In other words, they don't elect, they don't appoint. They have no say-so on who is sent on this board or commission. That board or commission shouldn't make regulations that affect the everyday life of those people. And come back to the legislative body and advise on what needs to be done, but don't have the power to enact ordinance and regulation.
Other questions? Mary Froney?
You spoke of minimum government. Are you aware that local government and state government has all sorts of ways that we can take on more government, and that there is the only way built into the present local governments or state governments for reducing government is a referendum? Are you trying to advocate that there should be some method that is easier than a referendum to decrease government?
I'm advocating that you write this charter in such a manner that it can't mushroom as it has in the past.
Are there other questions? Mr. Walker? Thank you very much for being here, Ira. Appreciate it very much. There's a gentleman down here, I think, wanted to, did you? Pam Stevens? Would you announce your name and speak up loudly?
My name is Pam Stevens, and I'd just like to share a few feelings that I have on some of the points the earlier speakers have talked about tonight. I'd like to, before I get started, say that they are feelings. I feel that you, the Charter Commission, have access to more experience, information, and expertise than I do, and I would be perfectly happy to vote for a charter that I felt was logically developed and logically defended. However, in some of the matters in terms of the type of mayor and the type of districting for our legislative body, I feel very strongly that we should have a strong mayor and that we should have single-member districts for the reason that the buck stops there. And I think it's important in terms of people being able to determine responsibility and for an efficient government to have this type of a setup. I think that the strong mayor also acts as a check and balance on the legislative body. I also feel very strongly there should be an ombudsman. The ombudsman becomes even more necessary if we have multi-member districts and or if we just have an assembly city manager type setup where there isn't a strong mayor who is responsible for the government. The ombudsman, in any case, is there to unravel the different departments, the different commissions, the different, all of the people who work for the government when the citizen has a complaint. But if you have multi-member districts and if you have no really clear mayor's office that people can go to, then the ombudsman needs to unravel that decision-making branch of government as well as the working branch of government for a citizen if there's a problem. I also think that some of the complaints people voiced against single-member districts and against a strong mayor would be solved simply by having a limit on consecutive terms in office for a person. I really like that idea because I think that spreads political goodies around and it keeps one particular person from building up a following in a corner of the city and just not being able to ever shake them out of that office. And let's see. Well, one fifth point, I really don't care what we call it. I think anchorage just by itself would be fine.
Are there any questions of Ms. Stevens? Mr. Scheid?
How do you ensure that you have a strong mayor?
That's a really interesting question. Hopefully the people that will run for it will be strong people. I assume you're in terms of personality.
Right.
I think that you can have a mayor, I don't know, I think it's a manager under the mayor to help the mayor run the city might be an advisable thing too, but I feel that we should, I don't know, I feel that we should have a mayor and not just have the legislative body. I think we'll get into all sorts of troubles if we don't have a policy-making head for the city as well as just an administrative head.
I'll start with that.
No, that's all I have to say.
I'd like to address Mr. Scheid directly on this question. Would it, to phrase this tactfully, would it appease your executive background, suggest a strong mayor, we're going to go against strong, but we'll say a mayor, elected mayor, which solves the problem, people want an elected head responsive to them because he is elected, with a limited term, the power to hire someone with a city manager background as his executive officer, provide the expertise in city management that he needs. Now here we have a mayor, little box off the side, answerable to him, on flow charts, on the lines put out of the city council and the commissions, etc., utilities and all that. But there's your executive officer. He's answerable to the mayor. He's also an information officer directly to the council if you question him. But the mayor is the mayor. The executive officer provides your administrative experience. That's so terribly important to someone who has been an executive. They can see where an expert should do the expert's job.
Well,
I understand your concern in this area.
the thing that bothers me is that a good mayor is generally a good politician and not a good administrator.
This is what bothers me about it.
And this is where you can get into a lot of trouble. Now, an administrator can be fired by the council. You can dispose of him quite readily if there's problems. You can't do that very readily with a mayor.
Which, pros and cons, I'm not going to get an argument about pros and cons.
And in writing a charter, we're thinking about 10 years from now, too. We're not just thinking about now. So you don't know what... You might get the
Gentleman
weakest
over
man.
here has a question.
It seems to me that if you did that, you'd be paying two people rather outrageously high salaries.
We are
for the
now.
same job.
And we've got two full-time jobs.
That's what you're trying to alleviate, isn't it?
No. We have that just in the city alone.
Somebody over here, Mary. Mary.
I'm Helen Godby again. I would say, well, the way you would check on an elected mayor if he weren't strong, isn't that the recall clause? See that the recall is made in a manner which is well advised? The people have to have the option
The people
to
are not-
eliminate. Well, if the mayor is not strong enough, he knows that he will be eliminated by a recall. Oh,
But strong is not an administrator. Strong is not an executive person with expertise in the management of something as involved as the physical plant of the city, which is monumental when you think of the area. An expert is needed to do the expert's job, not an administrator, but an expert in the subject of city management.
well, what I'm saying is the only recourse you have is a recall if you find out he is not doing his job. Otherwise, what can you do?
What I'm saying is there's more than a job than a mayor. A mayor is a mayor, and a city manager is a city manager. And you need both, but you don't want to call it like the setup we have now because we have the conflict. So if you have an expert answerable to the mayor is answerable to the people, the council is answerable to the people, and the mayor, that is checks and balances with expertise.
Young lady over here had a question.
Well, I was just wondering if,
Would you mind,
okay, I was just wondering if, like, didn't the mayor have to answer to all the different parts of the borough it is now? The general manager does the same thing. Okay, you have to go through, you have all these different areas that make up the borough. And the general manager has to know them all, the mayor has to know them all. If we have two people who have to answer to all these different areas of government. In other words, the mayor and the general manager both deal with the same people.
Fred?
So you need both. You need someone to try and get the message between the different parts of the borough and the mayor, or the mayor to
Mr.
Chairman,
Josephson?
I think that this discussion indicates the need to define terms when we use them, because the term strong mayor, and Mr. Garnett can correct me, has often been used to indicate a mayor who can veto ordinances, for one thing. It doesn't necessarily connote that he is the executive officer running the government, although it may mean that. It may be used in terms of his legislative and really political and policy-making responsibilities. So I think, hopefully when we move on with this, we'll try to use the terms so that we all use them in the same way.
Okay, point.
I'd like to just add and elaborate on that. Actually, there are two possibilities of what I said. Strong mayor, the veto power is what I had in mind. Another possibility that I'm just seeing is that we might possibly look at getting for people to run for mayor, people with expertise in city or borough management, and that you might define in the charter this as a qualification for being mayor. Now, this would limit the people that you would get to run for mayor. You might have somebody who was a very experienced lawyer or educator or what have you, who might make a good mayor in terms of setting direction for the borough city complex or Anchorage. And
or banker.
I tend to favor some of the previous statements about conflict of interest there. But you could go two ways. In other words, you could have the strong mayor just needing the veto power and have him depend upon his manager to interpret to him what's happening from all of the different departments. Or if you recruit a mayor who has experience in local government management, then he can just step in and directly be the executive over all the different department heads too.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Parsons, do you feel that the strong mayor should appoint his own city manager with approval of the legislative body, or doesn't need approval of the legislative body?
Yeah, that's an interesting question.
it's one that we're going to have to address because a lot of people talk about it. We don't have any strong feelings.
No, I don't have any feelings over this yet.
Mr. Chairman,
Mary Frony?
I think a lot of folks are unaware of the fact that the borough does have a professional manager. He was hired by Mayor Roderick, and he is answerable to Mayor Roderick and not to the Assembly directly. His name is not manager, they call him a staff director. But he performs exactly the same sort of administrative functions that we're speaking about. I have trouble visualizing the mayor acting both as the administrative head and as the publicity front that mayors are usually expected to handle also because of limiting number of 24 hours in a day. The other thing is that the administrator needs to be on hand quite constantly. And mayors are often needed to go to Washington or to Juneau or to big conferences to represent the area and the local government. And if you did not have an administrative head in his absence, lots of things would go on that you wouldn't want.
Mr. Merrill?
I came tonight for one reason more than anything else, was to sit and listen to what people had to say. I think I have one advantage that maybe some of the people here tonight don't have, and that's that I've worked for all forms of government which you've addressed.
Excuse me, sir. Could you talk just a little louder? I have difficulty reading with this loud mechanism. Thank you.
Whether you choose an official who is an elected official, let's address that point first, or whether you choose an official, or whether you choose an assembly or a group of people to choose a manager to operate a government, the job which that man does depends entirely upon his willfulness to be responsive to the public and to the people or the electorate as a whole. Now, this is particularly true of an elected mayor. Okay, now on a manager form of government, the particular job or good job or bad job which that guy does, I feel, having experienced it particularly upon the guides which the elected people in the districts give that individual to operate under. If they're not responsive to him, and if he gives them his best that he can in the guides that assembly or that council needs, they give him a decision for which he should operate under, that's good. But if they leave him, that's bad. I do say one thing is that I don't believe we need a full-time mayor and a full-time manager type of government. I think we should have either the mayor form of government with he appointing himself a staff director or a manager to help him out, or we should have a council and a full-time manager working for the council. One of those two, but not that hybrid in there. That is very confusing, and it's very difficult for a staff to be effective under those circumstances. I really don't have much to say about the voting apportionment or things like that yet, because I really haven't thought that much about it. But I do intend to give you further my comments by letter form or in writing, because I wasn't prepared to talk tonight. I just thought I might add this, and I'd be willing to try to answer some questions.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Merrill, and we will appreciate your letter. Are there any questions? Mr. Parsons?
Chairman, you mentioned the manager council forum, and then as the city has run, the mayor is one of the council who votes. I like this forum in many respects, but the thing that I don't like is that there's nobody to veto. In other words, it has to be that body making the decision. There is no balance or kind of thing, mechanism built into that particular form. Do you see any way around that?
The only way I can see around it is that electing a mayor with a veto power. If that's what you, as a group, feel is the best way to go, that's the way you should go. I don't intend tonight to voice my opinion, which I feel is the best. I feel that I can give you, and I will give you in writing, which I think are the strong points and the weak points of both systems. Not only in Alaska, but other places I've worked under these systems. And I can see that there are fallacies of both. Some of which have been brought out tonight, some of which haven't been brought out. The main point of what I wanted to say was the effectiveness of the job that is done by whomever that official might be that's going to run your government for you depends entirely on the capabilities of that man and how responsive he wants to be to the people that has elected him or appointed him. That's the key to it, I feel.
Jane Anglith?
Mr. Mayor, you indicated that you had worked as a staff member under all these forms of government. Did you find that your ability to function within the context of the different forms was based more on the personalities of the individuals involved in the structure of that government, or is one harder to work for than another as a result of the structure?
I knew both of the heads of the government very little. I saw them very little, so it wasn't a personality thing with me. I didn't know them. In the beginning, I wasn't far enough up in government where in a staff position where I wouldn't have known them that well. The last few years, or since I've been in Alaska, I have been. But I have very little contact today with Mayor Roderick, for instance. I had very little active contact with Robert Sharp when he was manager, or Douglas Wyford when he was manager. So I didn't form that at all. I felt my duty as a staff member was to give them the best information that I could give them, the best opinion, and I thought that's what they wanted. And whether they took it or not, that was their business. That was their decision to make.
Okay. As far as information you would give to them, is one structure easier to influence from a staff perspective than another?
No, I don't feel so at all. No. I say that now. I'll qualify that one way. If a manager council form of government is operating properly, it's just as easy to work under as an elected executive is. I can see no difference ever there. I feel that my obligation as a staff member is to give that person the best backing which I could give him, or that manager, that the people that are paying me, to give them the best I could give them, and regardless of the personalities that might be involved there.
Are there any other questions? No? Thank you very much for being here. Is there anyone else here tonight who would like to be heard? Yes, sir. Will you give your name and...
My name is Doug Garrett. I should like to comment. I object to the terms in which you're considering the questions of developing a charter. More specifically, this is drawn from an objection to the printed handout, which handed out tonight. I think most of the questions are superfluous. But it's obvious to me that it's drawn up in the consideration from the questions you've asked the other people who testified, that the thrust of the questions which you have to answer are determined, at least in great part, by the fact that most of you are politicians and have future political ambitions. And I think that the questions that you're concentrating on obfuscate the real issues. I believe in a very strong narrow blind item veto, and I believe in single-member districts because I might want to run for political office again myself sometime. But I don't really think those are crucial. It seems to me what's important is what powers does the government have. On the second page, the second paragraph says, how should the powers of government be extended or reduced to the community? Well, of course, that sentence assumes what the powers of government are. And it seems to be what you should consider, what should be the most important consideration for the Charter Commission to define exactly what the powers of government are, or should be. I do care whether you have single-member districts, because like I said, I may want to run, I intend to run for political office against myself, and I do care if the mayor is powerful or not. But those things are superfluous to the major point, which you should address yourselves to that point. What is the nature of government, and what should the nature of government be, and what power should it have? More specifically, on a personal level, I should like to know whether you intend to allow the local governments to continue granting monopolies to business and intend to continue passing out welfare in the form of free travel shots to people who want to go to Europe, building parks that people don't use. All those things happen given a certain nature of government that has been defined in the image of government. I would be predisposed to not only vote against, but campaign against any charter that would be drawn up under this auspice. If these are the questions you're considering, it seems to me what you'll end up with is a government that incorporates both the power that Borough now has and that the city has, and will simply achieve an even larger bureaucracy and even more control of the individual. So I would like to see you address yourselves to questions that I consider much more vital.
Mr. Chairman. Your comments interest me because I infer that you believe that some things that are done by government now, such as perhaps certain franchising that's done in certain fields, parks that are established, which you say aren't used by people, that those are, philosophically inappropriate for local government to do.
No.
Is that your position?
That may be my position, but that isn't my point. My point is that I think you should address yourselves to what should the powers of the government be. Then if you determine that that's what you'll address yourself to, I'll be most happy to tell you that yes, I do think that those things are inappropriate for local government. But
well, I have no hesitancy to address myself, and I doubt that my colleagues do, to those issues. Many of us, as you mentioned, have done that for years in public life. But the question I have is whether that's a function of the Charter Commission in the sense that those may be legislative judgments which representatives elected by the people will make over time and have been making over time under the existing form. I'm concerned, I'm not letting you answer, and I apologize for that, but I have to divest myself of this. I'm concerned that people may judge the Charter not in terms of the Charter as an alternative to existing governments under this state's constitution and this state's laws, but in terms of whether it is as good as some hypothetical paradise or utopia that they could envision in another state or in another context. And I hope that doesn't happen, but I have that fear as I listen to this that
you may rest assured that in my case that will not happen. If I determine that the Charter that you draw up simply incorporates all the worst features of the two governments that presently exist, and incorporates all the powers that they presently have into one larger bureaucracy, I'll vote no. If, on the other hand, I think that it limits government power in some way or does something that I like, then I'll vote in favor of it. I certainly have a platonic standard of what I'd like to see government be like, and I'm sure that you folks wouldn't achieve that. I wouldn't expect that to happen. But I still think The way in which the questions are phrased here completely obfuscate what the real debate should be, that is, what should the government do? I want to know what kind of taxation powers the new government will have. Whether I believe in taxation or not is a moot point. I want to know what you're going to put in the charter about taxation. It seems to me that what you're going to be left with is continue to argue about whether we're going to have a mayor with veto power or line item veto power and how many members to each district it is. We'll simply have the same system we have now in each of the two present governments. Because I don't see much difference.
No, but philosophically, just one more thing. Philosophically, someone mentioned regarding the use of the encouragement of private education through a credit.
I would answer no, but I would also like to say that I disagree with that idea. But I should like to see the charter limit the powers of government, or at least delimit them. That is, to tell us exactly what the government can do. I don't want to be at the mercy of the school board or the borough assembly to decide tomorrow that they'll franchise my business and that I won't get the franchise.
Mr. Fisher?
In the first place, Mr. Garrett, you seem like a very angry young man. I don't mind your taking your anger out on us, but well, that's good. I really couldn't disagree with you more. I really don't know. I wish you could give us an example of the powers that you're concerned with in the charter. Because, to me, one of the major issues of the charter is what the constitutional legislative body is going to be. That is a very, very important thing. And what the administrative, how you will be selected. That's very important.
And well, if you believe in unlimited government power vested in an individual, he can wield that power in whatever manner he wants, so long as the council allows it. You're quite right. If we've got a parliamentary system with no limitations on what the government can do, your point is very well taken. In this case, I'd be very specific. But I should think that we have a charter to limit what the government can do. That's what I want to know. What are you going to limit the government? What are you going to say it can't do?
Well, this is what I'm asking you. We're limited by the things the government can and can't do by virtue of state law, first instance, to a great extent. And that virtually sets our limitations. Now, there's additional limitations that we can set, and we should address ourselves. But frankly, they're rather minimal. And, I'm asking, should we limit the ability to have fire protection, the ability to have police protection, or sewers, water?
Certainly, those are the types of questions I think we should have. Should the government have a right to give a franchise to taxi operators? Should, at some point, they have a right to give franchises to hotel operators? Should the government have the right to have exclusive authority to run fire protection services? Or what sort of taxes can be levied? What sort of property taxes can be levied? What is the work?
I'm sorry.
I should like to know what limitations on taxation could be incorporated into the charter. And I would suggest, I should suggest that the most limiting possible clause be inserted to limit the government's power to taxes. Certainly, the present time seems to have unlimited power to taxes.
That's absolutely true.
Mr. Josephson again, or I yield to Jane.
As I understand it, and I've got Title 29, which is the state law before us, on what the powers of the local unit of government are as given to us by the state. It says we have the power to levy taxes, and it suggests that you may levy a property tax. Now, the way I view it, what the charter would say is that that legislative body, which is representative of people, which is why the question of how you want to elect that group, that those people who represent you and me would make the determination on the taxing policies for the area. To spell out in a charter in 1975 how taxation should be levied on real property or on individual pieces of ground that we want to be effective for a 20 or 40-year period, I think is unrealistic. And if we give that responsibility to the legislative body and are careful about how we draw that group up to represent you and I, then we can ensure that they won't tax us out of existence if we make sure that we communicate that to them. But that the charter be the framework whereby those decisions are made by that body who is voted upon by you and I. What state law says is you've got the power to levy taxes. What I think the charter should say is that legislative body determines how that is taken care of.
Well, given that you believe in unlimited legislative rule by which whatever legislative your point is valid, my point is that there should be some limits on what a legislative body can do in this area.
When you say, given that I believe that, would you repeat that part about...
Given that you believe that a legislative power should have unlimited authority to tax within the confines of the state constitution.
I didn't say that, the state said.
I know, that's what I'm saying. Given that you don't intend, apparently what you're saying, to write any limiting factor into the charter provision, into the charter itself, that I'm proposing you to do just
All right,
that.
my question is, do you think that it would be fair to future residents of Anchorage to be saddled with what we come up with in 1975, 10 years from now?
Well, they will be in Anchorage, won't they?
Well,
no, specifically on property tax, for example.
I think it's as fair as if they would be saddled with a government that doesn't have any limits on its power to tax.
But, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Garrett, the only basis on which there are constitutional provisions in federal and state law that are designed to safeguard rights of individuals, and naturally, this charter, like all other local government charters, must be consistent with those requirements. Beyond that, it seems to me what you're suggesting is that the 11 of us hold ourselves out to be wiser acting in 1975 than your elected legislators or assemblymen will be acting in 1976 or 1985 or 1995.
Exactly what you're doing.
Now, no, we're only doing it if we adopt your premise that we should tell them how to run the government in those situations that we can't even foresee. I mean, it's flattering, but I don't really know why I should indulge in that.
May I interpose here for a moment? We limit the powers when we put something in the charter that says there shall be a fire station on the corner of 4th and E. We've limited then the power of the legislative bodies, successive legislative bodies thereafter. And that is the kind of limitation you can put into a charter. I think most of us feel, I don't want to absolutely speak for everybody here, but I think most of us feel that we would prefer a bare bones charter without any legislation in the charter itself, that the legislation should be left to the elected officials who are put in office from time to time through the years to come to determine that they want and can and is desire of a citizenry, because they've elected these people to be taxed at a certain level at that time, which may be less or may be more, usually more, but maybe less or maybe more, according to what that legislative body and the people of that time and era think is necessary. And we don't feel that we can do that in the charter itself without making an anachronism of the charter within a very short period of time.
Well, I think your erection of a straw man within your statement is very debilitating to your point. I don't suggest that the charter proposes that there be a fire station at 4th and E. I do propose, for instance, that the charter say that we the local borough government cannot tax any person beyond a certain limit, that the property assessment of a particular given piece of property while it's in possession of one person cannot change. Those are principles. You're talking about concrete. I'm talking about concepts and principles. I'm not proposing that the charter say that the government can't tax more than $2,336,014 in a given year. I don't think we get away with that.
Mr. Chairman, Parker was asking. Jane, just a moment, Jane. Lisa was asking.
Statutes that municipality organized under this section, which we're working under, shall have all powers except for that are prohibited by law, and ones that are granted to organize first-class cities. What those are, I've been going through the statutes and the government. In some areas it says you can either go by ordinance, the borough can do it by ordinance, or that it is governed by law, by charter. So to these certain areas, it all depends on what law we can do.
Yes, there's no constitutional restrictions as far as I can see. I'm sure they would like to provide it correct. It says that you cannot place further limitations on the power of an assembly or a particular legislative body to particular government. That's what I'm suggesting to do.
Jane, pardon me, Dick, Jane asked.
Doug, I guess I feel like the part about how powers, what powers are and how powers are either extended or reduced in an area is a concern of me. And I don't know how a charter can answer your particular concern about defining what those powers are. But I do think we can deal with how much you pay for what services you want.
Can you deal with my right to freely enter and exit a given business? Can you prevent the city, or whatever you call it, since that seems to be one of your major concerns, borough, whatever, from monopolizing the garbage collection business? Can you guarantee me the right to freely enter and exit that particular business?
I can guarantee you what you are guaranteed as an individual entrepreneur under the Constitution of the United States.
Which, in this case, what would that be?
Okay, the Bill of Rights.
But you see, that doesn't, at least the Supreme Court says that doesn't protect my right to freely enter and exit the garbage business in Anchorage. The charter that you folks write to do that.
Well,
no, but it would.
Chairman,
Okay,
I'm going to come down the table this way.
In relation to this thing that you object to, in talking to other people who have approached us in one fashion or another, they said, these are the things that are going to kill your charter. These are the big questions that are going to kill it if you don't deal with them, which is why these particular questions were raised for your consideration right now. You might note that it says, please comment on anything else that you think we ought to be dealing with, and I appreciate the fact that John.
Thank you.
Joe, did you have?
Well, I was just reminded that a justice of the Supreme Court once said something to the effect that if the Congress of the United States wants to take this country to hell, it's our business to let that happen. Within constitutional limits, we can't substitute our judgment for what is right or wrong for the Assembly's judgment or the legislature's. I mean, suppose the legislature compels local governments to have mass transit programs in the future. This charter can't prevent that.
Quite right. I don't propose that it try. I only propose that in the areas that are open, in the parameters of action that you are able to work in, that you do as much as possible to permit the freedom of enterprise, for one thing. I don't want Mr. Sheffield to be put out of business when you start granting hotel franchises.
Mary Froney?
Doug, you made one statement there that interests me. Something about you thought that the assessment on a piece of property shouldn't be changeable while it was under the same ownership. I can give you an instance of that having happened. My husband, during or right after World War II, lived in a South Carolina town, and the sons of the town came home and started their families, and there were quite a number of them that went over to a nearby military base and picked up housing that was still in packages and took it home and put up these prefab little homes. And they cost them, I think it was around $3,000 to $10,000. It sounded to me like an awfully small sum that these prefab homes cost. Well, he tells me that they had one of these, and that they could see the chickens running underneath the house through the floor. So you can understand what quality of workmanship was involved. But the assessor came along and he assessed them for what they had paid on their homes, while their parents were living in stone and brick homes on the old Main Street that had been assessed about 20 years previously. And in this town, they only assessed new buildings. The old assessments always remained the same. All right, their parents in the old, well-built homes were paying on very small assessments, while the sons came home from the war and their new families were assessed on the new payment, and they were paying 2 and 3 and 4 times the amount of tax on 1/10 of a house in relation to what their parents had.
As usual, your concerns are right on. I see why the other politicians don't care for you so much. But isn't it a fact? Of course, the overwhelming majority of cases are the reverse case. It's the person with the limited income who purchases at a given period of time, and then we folks, through your zoning power that you granted the government, allow that area to become zoned and therefore more valuable, and the person with the limited income, and in most cases, an elderly person or a person on a fixed income is taxed out of the home by having it reassessed. Isn't that far more frequent?
I'm not sure that it is. I've come to the conclusion that the problem is topsy growing, and that unless we can somehow ask the question of the voter, not whether he likes apple pie, but whether he feels he can afford apple pie, that we might get a more reasonable answer, and topsy might not grow as well.
Are there any more questions? Thank you for being here. Is there anyone else that wishes to be heard? If not, the public hearing is adjourned. For the Charter Commission, is there any unfinished business? Under new business, I'd like to have a charter to entertain a motion on pay the bill to our recorder, Colleen Fine.
So moved, Mr. Chairman. Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? And go on. I'd like to go to the committee reports. I do want to tell you that there were radio public service announcements along with the purchased radio time about this meeting and the meeting tomorrow night and next Wednesday and Thursday. And I'd like to ask Jim if he'd made any progress late this afternoon or early this evening on the location.
Chairman, I have not heard from Mr. Engelmeyer on the Alaska Mutual space. Mrs. Kaiser has put someone else on the matter. Her space is evidently taken. A suggestion has been offered that we might get one of the Turnigan Arms apartments that's converted. It has the same objection as I've heard on some other areas that we have explore it, and that is that it's difficult for parking, and does not allow the easy access that we would like as one of the features of the location. We're going slowly. Maybe by tomorrow.
Well, Evie is waiting. She needs a place to hang her hat and do her work.
I'll talk with her after the meeting, and she can come with me and decide which of these seems to have the most advantage. Tomorrow, she will.
I'm going to serve statue first, check out the room for tomorrow night.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
See how the band is.
Yeah, see how the band is.
Are there any commission member comments? Sherry?
I haven't asked anyone, but it appeared, I think, in the morning paper that the notice for tomorrow night's meeting was incorrect.
That is correct. I have called both the morning paper and the afternoon paper and asked them please make comment upon it.
In addition, I wonder on this information sheet that we hand out, on the second page, do we want to say service tax instead of hours?
May I have a copy of those?
Is there any discussion on it?
We talked about this in I don't know what committee, and the question really was, it's not, the question really is powers. It's not a matter of whether or not you extend this trunk sewer line this way, but we're talking about the whole gamut of powers.
Aren't you talking about the exercising of the power rather than the granting of the power? I mean, for instance, if you take police, let's use that as
And that's a power, not a service.
Okay, there's the police power, and the government has the police power as a government, and then choose which areas it will exercise that power or provide that service to the people. You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah, I am, but I'm disagreeing.
I mean, we can grant to this government all powers and then say that the exercise of that power or the performance of the service will have to be voted on.
Do you think that'll get us out of the bind we're in? I don't think it will. Is that what you said?
The objection that I see is if you ask them how powers will be extended, you get into the second-class borough kind of concept of a vote of the entire populace and power.
That's exactly what, yeah. Okay, well, when we talked about it in relation to both the survey and what the authority issue was, it was, the hard question was the second-class city or borough concept of the extension of powers and whether or not the legislative body makes that determination or whether or not the people vote on it. And people have the right not only to extend services, but also to request that they not get them shoved down their throat. And that's really the question. And it's a hard one, but I think that's, to sidestep and call something else, I think would be.
You know, I think Joe mentioned earlier, one thing we really ought to do, and I will try to do this, is to make some sort of a glossary of the terms that we use, because there is a lot of possibility for confusion. And I haven't analyzed this particular one to death, but I think there's something to what Sherry is saying, in that when we talk about creating a home rule borough, we are talking about a borough with all the powers, in the abstract, the powers. And when we talk about a particular neighborhood, we're talking about whether that power will be exercised to extend the particular service to that neighborhood. There is a real difference in those concepts. And I don't know what we're trying to find out when we pose the question.
Does Jane understand that what Sherry is talking about is not powers as used throughout that paragraph, but only as used in the first part of it?
only the fourth word.
Only the fourth word of the paragraph. And there's a difference. I think it's clear if you use services at that point, because the rest of it does use power.
And it uses it
Correct.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I did ask, because of the colloquy tonight, that we have from the attorney a glossary of these words of art, and we can all have them, we can give them to witnesses, and we're all talking from the same
Well, we've had quite a little bit of discussion this evening that really was at cross purposes because we weren't talking about the same thing, using the same word. And I think the glossary of terms would be a very excellent addition to our meeting. Yeah. I would entertain a motion for adjournment, Mr.
Or inlet towers, or whatever they call it now.
But I was just wondering, about the L Street Apartments, it's cycle. It's an old building. And is it going to turn into a Providence Hospital someday? It's just going to be sitting there, no one's going to go into it. Or a slum. Better yet, or worse yet.
Well, that's one thing I think they could put in an ordinance, is that a building is empty for so long, the people gotta get it out of there.
All right, but they can't afford to remove it. That is a major problem, is the cost of removal.
Blow it up.
This is one of the hardest PUDs we've ever had to analyze, and I'll tell you, when it comes to recommending pro or con, it's just right on the line.
When you started out, you said something about the neighborhood. There was no restriction on the number of units.
In a PUD, there's no restriction on anything. In fact, isn't it true, Bill, that it's just a stepping stone that people are conforming to basically the same density that the zoning which is proposed requires? Well, they like to aim in that direction. They can deviate from that. The underlying zone could allow 50 units per acre.
But
they generally like to have the PUD somewhere around the neighborhood at 50 to 60 units per acre. It doesn't have to be approval on much greater density.
Well, possibly limit the height of that, but I like that design a lot better than a lot of these.
The design?
It's excellent.
These quibble with any of the ugly things.
Snazzy.
I think they're just so ugly looking.
We need that.
Those big complexes that have these, just off Gamble Street and, they look like a bunch of barracks.
Right.
I'd much rather see a tall tower like this arrangement than those barrack-looking things that are spouting all over the community. You go out Gamble Street and they're horrible.
I think one of the worst ones is out at C Street, facing C Street on the west side. On the south.
George has been fighting.
Oh, yeah, that's right in George's neighborhood. Oh, yeah, they compacted the
Casablanca.
people per unit.
No, not Casablanca. That's not too nice either. But I mean, it's the one that was just finished a year ago, and it faces C Street, and the entrance is on the other side, though. But the back of it, and it just looks like a. Huh? What is it called? No.
The side of Lusac Song.
It's just the south side of Chester Creek Park.
Is that it? Is it? I don't know what they call it.
Well, the big tall ones.
Stan Thompson building.
That's right, Stan Thompson, right. His park.
But I don't know, Bill, one thing that I was thinking that I think that there's going to have to be a long look at this because it's a major development, and that we're going to have to look at our town and not as it is right now, but
As it is 10 years from now.
years from now to see how that really fits. And it's a very unpopular approach, but I think that
You gotta face it though.
all that.
You've done all that, but have you come up with any conclusions yet?
We've always had the problem of where we trade off people in the news and their desires against what we believe is best for the whole town. And that's a hard choice to make.
Well, here's something else that makes me wonder. We're always talking about low-cost housing. I feel sorry for these people that own these homes around there. I was thinking of another area, at Camlin, apartments, isn't that what it's called?
Seattle, you mean?
No. Just Hamlet, in that area. Those people own their homes. A lot of them. They're most of them are single-family units out there. And here, a developer wants to come in and rip down these places that they can afford to live in, and replaces it with something that it cannot afford. Well, this is it. We've got an area here where these people can afford to live, but where can they afford to go in the future? They're not low cost. They're just a bit above it. Some of them are, and some of them aren't. Yet, where do they go? There's nothing new being provided for them unless they go into another rundown area, which is being gradually worn out. So I think it's the wrong attitude to say that the age, unless they are of an age to be condemned, that we should say that they're of an age that they're of no value. They are needed, and we have to admit to it.
The thing is, it is a low-cost housing with escalation for one thing, and people don't qualify for loans who are in that. They're just caught up in kind of a syndrome of some type, and the government can't even help it out. I mean, there are 2, 3, 5 programs that have just totally been unsuccessful, and they're not even into it. So I don't know what we're going to do along that line. They may have to be subsidized, and it's a tough time, I think.
Well, I'm out near this area, and you could say that eventually we're going to have to face it if they go through with this doggone 16th Avenue freeway, which is still being talked about. Debating 15th and 16th, but we are free and clear on our land at the present time. We can't sell it. No one can get enough down payment to cover what we would need. We can't afford to go anyplace else to build. We don't have a backlog of money. Everything's sunk in that piece of property. So we're in the same condition as these people around this apartment house, or in some of the areas in town.
Or everybody else in town.
You're one of the... You're a member of the unvocal public.
I'm not unvocal, unfortunately. I howl. But it's something that I don't know how to face it.
I think that it's a quandary that everyone shares, and I don't know. It's a matter of economics, and it's not too healthy right now.
It's bad. Sure. Anyone who's got a loan on the property, they're better off than we are.
Come in, for an interview. It's not like they have to stay with you in the middle of it and pass and fail. That'd be great. Just view of seeing this lawsuit, this Robertson on what we expect possibly is to let him afford these providers.
Easier so that they automatically think to say, we'll let you on all of our fees
do you propose to involve department personnel in the formulation of programs involving city funds? That seems confusing and sounds to me as though you're asking, wanting everybody an opportunity to have said everything they want to say to us. Now, they had applications, we want them to, if they want to say something additional, provoked by these applications or raised by them, well, we want to hear it then, and if not, well, then I think we should get right into the question. Well, you're either questioning them or deciding it. I don't know whether these questions or not. I mean, we've had this essential information now for about 4 months. So we've had a number of meetings on it already, so I don't anticipate that this isn't like we're coming into it without knowing anything about what's going on. If we've changed the rules of the ballgame, we want everybody to come in and tell us how it's affected them if it has. So, okay, if we take Boys Club first, then we're sort of taking the longevity approach. They were the first one.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question? Tom, did you and Bruce talk about this before? Yes, sir. All right, now, is there anything new that you want to add, or should we keep questions? I think, as far as Boys Club is concerned, and of course, see, Terry Goes is, this is Red Cross money, taking this one example. So, as far as, according to Tom, as far as Boys Club is concerned, why, is there any questions? Everybody's seen this stuff? As you say, been in here for 4 months. In essence, it's the same as what we had last year.
Okay, well, we'll feel free to ask questions. If there's anything additional from the Boys Club wants to say about it, I want to give them the chance to say it. Let me ask one more thing about this raised question before maybe we ought to decide as we have. What about your voting, Jeff? We've never questioned or had a procedure on that before. Should you vote on these applications, or should anybody personally on the Boys Club one I'm thinking? Yeah, you.
Well, I'll abide by the wishes of the committee.
Well, we don't have any wishes at the moment, so I'm asking whether we should have any procedure on that.
Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll abstain.
Well, I don't know if that's necessary, but I want to establish the same procedure for everybody. And the question just occurs to me now. We have a form without it.
location